My artwork is really influenced by what I collect, and because both, I guess, are influenced by what I love. So I really like vintage and antique things. I particularly love Kewpie dolls. My first Kewpie-related item actually is something I've had since I was a baby. I have a china plate that my grandmother gave me when I was born, I think, that I just grew up with. It's a Kewpie sleeping in a poppy, and in tattooing it became a Kewpie sleeping in a red rose. A very classic image that you may have seen before. That is also a really famous tattoo image because sailor tattoos, that era of, it's called American traditional tattoos, a lot of what the images were based on was pop culture. Kewpie dolls, for those who don't know, was like as big as Mickey Mouse back then. I mean, they're huge. It's a design that started as a comic book illustration by an artist, Rose O'Neill, and eventually became dolls. Started as a bisque porcelain doll, then became a composition doll, rubber, vinyl. Like, Kewpie dolls found their way into Tattoo Flash. Hi, I'm Show Pigeon. You can call me Evie. I'm an artist and business owner. I'm primarily a tattooer. I also paint, and I do a lot of artist collaborations that let me delve into other things like toy making, apparel, other merch and products. I'm a toy collector, absolutely. I used to be shyer about it, and then in the last several years I've learned to not care and let my freak flag fly. I have toys all over my studio and my home, and sometimes I joke that having a studio is really just an excuse to have a place for my collection. So I've been a tattooer for 12 years. I've been an artist in general for a longer time, but a professional artist for 12 years. Tattooing was my first professional art, and then my painting technique grew out of that. My painting technique is based in traditional tattoo flash, which, if you don't know that term, it's like if you think of a sailor going into a shop and picking out an eagle or a heart off the wall, that's flash, is what that's called. So the way the old-timey tattooers used to paint that is with India ink and watercolor, and they would use their spit on the brush to draw the gradients out. And so my mentor, who taught me tattooing, taught me that technique as well, and then I started using it in paintings. First painting flash, but then eventually painting just whatever watercolors with that. So 12 years of tattooing, the painting grew out of that, and then I started doing artist collaborations maybe, I guess it was around the time that I started to branch out and have my own studio, because it gave me the freedom to work more on my own instead of feeling like I was beholden to the owner of the tattoo shop, because I suddenly was the owner of the tattoo shop. So I started working with one friend in particular, Miss Ladybug is her brand, and she would have me design an image and put it on some clothing. Then I met Kate Bittersqueaks, and we started a toy collaboration. I had this dream of making my own Kewpie doll, basically my own version of a Kewpie doll. And she owns the Edward Mobley Toy Estate and had a mold that looked a lot like my sketch, my character design. So we got together and started producing it. That's the biggest artist collaboration I've done to date. And then, you know, I do little projects here and there with other artists. That part of it, the artist collaboration part, has grown more over the last 6 years, I'd say. I always did art in some form or another, and my mom was really encouraging of me dabbling in art. She was really creative. My parents were more academic. My dad is a psychologist, my mom was a teacher. They both have PhDs. But I had extended family that were professional artists. I had a great aunt on my mom's side, her aunt, who was an illustrator, and my dad's sister is a curator and artist herself. And so I had a sense of art as a career, but I also had this feeling of like I was supposed to do the traditional straight-laced thing. So, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I painted and sculpted and took art classes. I thought about going to art school for college, but ultimately I decided that it wasn't practical, which is funny because now, of course, I make my living off of art. But it took me a while to get to that. I went to college and tried to figure out some sort of practical job that I could do that felt a little bit creative. So I explored, maybe I want to do PR marketing. And then I went the other way and was like, maybe I want to do social work. But ultimately I graduated and didn't know what I wanted to do. So I fell into different odd jobs. So I have a history of mental illness as well. With depression is mainly how it manifests. And I got to the point where I was just overwhelmed, and I was aware of what I thought everyone else wanted for me, but I had no idea what I wanted for myself. And I started making choices little by little to do things that were kind of just because I wanted to do them. And so one of those things was that I got my first tattoo. And then the world didn't end. So I was like, that's interesting. And so I got another one. And then I started just being really interested in tattoos and not thinking about it as a career, like it hadn't occurred to me yet. But I would doodle tattoo ideas. MySpace was the social media of the time. So I was following a lot of tattooers and reading about old school tattoos and sailor tattoos. And eventually I just had this moment where it clicked that that's a job, and it was the only thing that was getting me excited, the only thing I was really interested in. At the time, Miami Ink. was the tattoo TV show, and there was an apprentice on that. So that's how I realized, okay, if you want to get into tattooing, you have to get an apprenticeship. So my husband Googled how to get a tattoo apprenticeship, and it suggested putting together a portfolio of my artwork, which was something that hadn't occurred to me. So I thought, oh, okay, perfect. It also gave me the opportunity to stall for a long time because I was really scared. So at the time I was working at a chiropractor's office, like I said, just odd jobs I had fallen into. And I would work during the day, and then I'd go home and I would sit and I would draw. And I put together basically really rudimentary flash designs that when I look back now, like, thank God my mentor saw potential because to me, I'm like, whoa, I need to learn how to draw. Obviously I did, but then I just started contacting people. It's really hard to get an apprenticeship. I got a lot of rejections. And then I found somebody great who was willing to teach me. And I worked under her official apprenticeship for a couple years, and then worked alongside her for a couple years. That was back in Chicago where I grew up, and then moved out to California because of my husband's job 10 years ago. Then I worked at shops with other artists and other owners for a while, and opened my own studio here 6 years ago. When I got interested in tattooing and became a tattooer, my first love tattoo-wise was these classic sailor tattoos, and so I started doing designs inspired by them. I already knew what Kewpie was. Like I said, I had that plate from my childhood, and I just started doing all these different designs with Kewpies, and it was so fun. Everything I drew just made me smile. And again, with my history of depression, it was fun to just do things for the joy of it. When I was a younger artist, like growing up in my art, I always felt like I defined myself by my depression, and like put value in like that I was this deep person who was sad all the time, which is a bummer to feel like I'm basing my value in my mental illness. Obviously, I've worked a lot out of that to get away from that in my healing and my recovery from it. And really celebrating joy is my big thing. And doing artwork that is a celebration of the frivolous things that I love is, I think, a huge part of that. I love doing a tattoo that just makes you smile. I always say, like, what better thing to have on your body than something that you're just gonna look at and smile every day? And that's how I feel about my toy collection too. Because I collect Kewpies so extensively at this point, I try to avoid collecting too much other stuff because it can get out of hand. Kewpies just delight me. And I'm not super well versed in the value of, I mean, I have a better idea than your average person who doesn't collect Kewpies. The ones I collect, it's more based on just the ones that I see and my heart jumps. So I have a lot of rubber Kewpies, which are more recent, well, 70s and 80s probably. I like them. The kid in me finds them huggable and it makes me smile. I also have some bisque ones, but I don't have any of like the super original Rose O'Neil Blue Wing bisque ones. I have some of the 20s through 30s era ones where it's like the jointed bisque doll that's standing. I love those. And I've invested in a few of those that I have at my home in a special case. And then my most recent acquisition is this totally creepy composition Kewpie doll. I think it's from like the 30s. And when I say creepy, I mean, it's creepy in a way that I find delightful, which is that it at one time had hair, and it's an old doll that's been well loved, and its hair has been well loved and rubbed off, and so it's got this like wispy, spindly hair. I find it very charming. But others, like I bought it and my husband said, okay, that one's going to your studio. That is not going in the house. I like the older Kewpies that need love, you know? They've been loved and then they've kind of been put aside, and then I uncover it at a flea market and I'm like, oh, you sweet baby, you need a home and you can come live with me and with your Kewpie brethren and you'll have a nice life. How long have I been collecting? I mean, collecting things always. When I was a kid, I had a rock collection, but it wasn't like actual rocks. It was basically gravel. Or I mean, I had a shoebox that I covered with wrapping paper and like made it my little rock collection. I just always collected stuff. And like I had Barbie dolls longer than you're like supposed to. And it was a secret that I was embarrassed about, but I would still take them out and play with them when the door was closed. And my parents would like knock on the door and I'd be like, just a second. Because I was embarrassed because I was whatever, 12 and still playing with Barbie dolls, which, you know, now I'm like, go for it. Actually, my first Kewpie doll was much more recent than you might think. It was within the last 10 years. I had the Kewpie plate from when I was a kid, but I never had Kewpie dolls. I had already started doing the tattoos of Kewpies, and then I was at like a little antique store in Santa Barbara. I was up there for my cousin's wedding, and there was this little rubber Kewpie doll, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's the cutest thing. I obviously need a Kewpie doll. And then you can't just have one Kewpie doll because there's so many different varieties. So I started collecting more and more. And then once people know you like a thing, they start giving them to you. So I would get a lot of gifts of Kewpies, which truly never bothered me at all. Like, it wasn't a collection where you're like, oh man, now I'm stuck collecting frogs or whatever. Like, it was legitimately something I was always, and still am, always delighted to get a Kewpie. My mother-in-law finds the best Kewpies because she's out in central Illinois. And so she'll go to antique stores and things that aren't as picked over as like a place here where somebody like me would go and get Kewpies. So she finds these really cool old like chalkware carnival prize Kewpies, or little porcelain ones, or sort of these like knockoff Kewpies that were unlicensed, but they're old enough now that it's also collectible and also just charming, and so I want to collect it just because I like it. So I have an older brother who's a minimalist. He's all about like trying to live with as little stuff as possible. And that is not me. I love my stuff, I really do. It's shallow and materialistic. I mean, I try to be sustainable in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess the fact that I collect toys is better. I don't know. I don't want to put a moral judgment on any of it. Basically, it brings me joy. It's like an apology to myself as a 12-year-old who I like would shame for playing with my Barbie dolls, you know? Like, why should I be ashamed of that? There's this idea of like certain things at certain ages, and you have to throw away childish things at a certain point, but I don't know, life's a bummer enough. Life is serious enough, and surrounding myself with things that bring me joy is important. I get a lot of my collectibles at flea markets. In Southern California, there are so many great ones. Back in Chicago, my husband and I, we used to go to the Kane County flea market in Kane County by St. Charles, Illinois, and we would find good finds there. And there's places around, but out here, once we moved, I met somebody early on who was like, oh, what do you like to do? suggesting things to me in my new home. And I said, oh, we really like flea markets and antique stores. And he was like, oh, you have to check out the Rose Bowl Flea Market. So that was the first one we went to, which is great. And then we found out about the Long Beach Flea Market. My studio is in Orange, and there's the Orange Circle, which is full of antique shops. So I go there a lot. A lot of times we'll do a day trip just based on going to an antique store. Around California, there's so many different towns and areas that you can do a day trip to. So if you go a little farther out, anywhere just a little less populated, there's gonna be better antiquing for sure. So, I've seen, I forget where I was, up by Monterey at just whatever antique shop. I saw the most amazing Kewpies I'd ever seen. They were out of my budget because they were the real deal with the original boxes, which is kind of my dream Kewpie. One day I'll have one of the bisque ones in the original box with the Rose O'Neil illustrations. The tattoos that I do, that's my primary job and my primary source of income. I also have a rotating line of merch, I guess. I don't have a line of merch that necessarily sticks around forever. It's kind of I'll do a small run of something. My biggest run of merch that I've done is a character called Pigeon the Cute doll, which is a collaboration with Bitter Squeaks. And together we worked to develop a toy version of this character I had drawn. We started by making them in resin at about 3 inches. And I did a line of 100 dolls. I hand painted every single one. It was a total labor of love. And those I have all sold. I have a couple that I kept for myself, but otherwise those are not available anymore. Then we made a mini pigeon doll version, which was factory made. I designed the outfits, but then they're made in a factory and painted in a factory. And they're 1.75 inch, I think, little vinyl dolls. And it's basically my version of a Kewpie doll. So those I sell at events and through my website. I also sell my paintings through my website, and sometimes I do art shows and events, things like that. Right now I have patches that are based on my artwork. I've also done a lot of enamel pin collaborations with the pin company Yesterdays. And then I've done a few enamel pin runs just on my own. I have bracelets right now that are a collaboration with a local macrame artist, Lilac Crafted. And basically I took a illustration of mine, made it into a charm, and then the bracelets are made with that charm. I even did a collaboration with a local flower designer who does bouquets, and she did floral arrangements using my little Pigeon the Cute doll in the bouquet. That was a really fun one. Basically, I really like to work with other artists who just inspire me, who get me excited. So yeah, so I sell at events. I a lot of times do designer con or small pop-ups, and then I sell through my website. I have an online store through my website. So to find me online, all you have to do is remember Show Pigeon, because my website is showpigeon.com. My Instagram, my TikTok, my Twitter that I don't use super regularly, it's all Show Pigeon. And then my website has information about how to get tattooed by me. It has a store with all of my products. And I do business and creative consultations as well. So generally for younger artists who are trying to figure out how to grow their career, or if they're maybe interested in opening their own studio, putting on an event. I've curated events before. Pretty much it allows them to pick my brain about anything. There's information about that on my website as well. You can see my tattoo portfolio, my object portfolio of some of the products I've worked on in the past, and read more about me and get in touch. I'm not a super goal-specific person. I don't set a really specific goal, but I set general goals or things to generally work towards. So when I started to think, oh, one day I'm gonna want my own studio, I didn't have a really specific idea, but I was like, okay, start saving money as much as you possibly can, because it's gonna take money. And, and then it kind of developed along the way. So in 10 years, I would really like to do more with consulting and community, by which I mean, I think sometimes about having a larger space. I don't know if I'll change my space or if I'll just expand how I connect with people, but I'd like to do more pro bono stuff where I can do creative consultations for young artists who don't necessarily have the opportunity to pick the brain of someone who's a professional, who's been doing it a longer time than they have. The thought of having a bigger space would be to do things like more fundraisers. I've used this space for fundraisers in the past, and I'd like to again. I haven't yet post-world with COVID, but I'd like to get back into that when it feels a little safer to have an event with a lot of people in a small space. You know, I've been percolating on ways to do that at other spaces that are larger or outdoor spaces. Just ways that I can sort of be community focused. You know, I didn't grow up in Southern California, but it's become my home to the extent that a little less than a year ago, my husband and I actually bought a home here. We love the community in this area. I mean, we picked Anaheim specifically to buy our house because I had gotten involved with the Anaheim Halloween parade a few years back and the fall festival and met people through that. And I see this as a lifelong career, the tattooing, and the art, and I want to keep expanding it in ways that serve my artistic desires and also serve the community that's embraced me.